Welcome to This Explainer. If you're watching this right now, there is a very good chance you probably just rewound that intro. Or actually, maybe you're already debating whether you even clicked on the right explainer, or if you should have just kept scrolling. And now you're thinking about the fact that you're thinking about it. Well, hi. This one is absolutely for you. We're going to dive straight into this because most people completely misunderstand what it actually means to be an overthinker. We're going to break down exactly what is happening inside your head. So it's incredibly common for people to assume that overthinkers just, well, worry too much, that it's just some simple nervous habit, kind of like biting your nails. Except instead of chewing on your cuticles, you're chewing on literally every single social interaction you've had since 2009. But honestly, that framing completely misses the reality of what's actually going on inside a mind that simply refuses to turn off. It's not just a flaw, it's not just a quirky personality trait. So let's take a look at the actual biological mechanics of why your brain won't quiet down. Okay, part one, inside the overthinking mind. Let's get right into the hardware of what happens when you start spiraling. Your brain has something that researchers call the default mode network. Now, this is a highly sophisticated network that fires up the exact moment you stop actively focusing on a task in the outside world. It's built for introspection, for imagining the future, and for reading complex social situations. But here's the catch. For people who overthink, this network doesn't just run. It runs exhaustingly loud. It's constantly scanning, constantly replaying, and constantly analyzing. The real question, though, isn't just which part of the brain is involved, but why it absolutely refuses to stop.
And that brings us to a really critical distinction in our next section: rumination versus productive reflection.
See, there's productive reflection, which actually moves you forward toward a conclusion or a solution. But then there is what psychologist Susan Nolan-Hoeksema has spent decades researching, which is known as rumination. Rumination is when you cycle through the exact same thoughts on repeat, just dressed up in slightly different costumes, without ever actually arriving anywhere. You aren't problem solving, you're just rehearsing the problem over and over again. Her research actually found that rumination doesn't process negative emotion at all. Instead, it preserves it. It keeps it perfectly trapped like a bug in amber. And worse, staying trapped in this loop makes you significantly more likely to develop depression over time. Which leads us to the most frustrating irony of the whole shebang. 2 a.m., we've all been there, right? The entire reason your brain is keeping you awake at 2 a.m. when you desperately need to be up at 7 is because some part of you truly believes that if you just think long enough and hard enough, you're eventually going to land on that one magic thought that fixes the problem and makes everything okay. Sadly, you won't. But your brain? It forces you to try anyway. So, why on earth do our brains do this to us? Let's reframe this completely in section 3, empathy without an off switch.
This right here is absolutely crucial to understand. Overthinking is very often an old survival adaptation. Many overthinkers actually grew up in environments where uncertainty felt genuinely dangerous. Maybe you had to constantly read the moods of the adults around you just to make sure you were okay. Your brain learned at a very young age that thinking 10 steps ahead was a highly effective survival tool. The problem? Well, you're still doing it today in totally ordinary, everyday situations. You're literally building complex case files over an ambiguous facial expression someone made in a Tuesday morning meeting. Your brain doesn't distinguish between a genuine physical threat and a social scenario you've over-indexed on. To your body, the stress hormone cortisol is cortisol, and that physical reaction you feel is completely real.
Let's look at how this actually plays out in the real world. Think about the last time you had to cancel plans. Someone who doesn't overthink just types, "So sorry, can we reschedule?" and hit send in, 9 seconds? But an overthinker? Oh no. You go through this agonizing 25-minute 6-step process. You write it out, then you delete the word sorry because, well, it implies you did something wrong. But wait, now you sound too cold, so you add sorry back in. Then you stare at the word reschedule and start to panic, so you send a draft to a friend for a second opinion, only to finally hit send on a message that is almost identical to your very first draft. I know someone watching this right now just thought, oh my gosh, that is literally me. But listen, this isn't because you're broken. It's because you have deep, profound empathy, and you're just trying to account for every single possible way the other person might feel. You just don't have an off switch. And this brings us to the absolute cruelest double standard of overthinking. Overthinkers operate on 2 completely different sets of rules. Think about it. You will easily spend 40 minutes extending boundless compassion to a friend, doing everything to convince them that they aren't a burden. And then, you'll spend all night lying wide awake, absolutely convinced that you are one. You extend hyper-awareness and empathy to everyone else around you, but you leave literally zero compassion for yourself.
So, if it's this exhausting, why can't we just turn it off? Let's move to our next section to find out the white bear paradox. Psychologist Daniel Wegner ran this brilliantly Madden experiment. He gave participants one incredibly simple instruction: do not think of a white bear. The participants managed to do it, barely, but the exact second they were allowed to stop suppressing that thought, the image of the white bear came flooding back into their minds way harder than if they had never tried to push it away in the first place. So here is the crucial takeaway from that. Suppression creates a neurological debt. Every single time you forcefully tell yourself to just stop overthinking, or every time a well-meaning friend says, hey, just stop worrying about it, you are practically guaranteeing failure. You're neurologically setting yourself up for those thoughts to rush back in even worse than before. It's deeply ironic, right? But it proves that actively fighting the noise is just not the solution. Which brings us to the final and definitely the most practical part of our explainer: managing the mental noise. How do we actually live alongside a brain that acts like this? First things first, we have to recognize what the noise actually means. Overthinkers usually have zero problem making rapid-fire decisions about things they consider meaningless, like, say, what to eat for dinner. But the exact moment a choice involves relationships or loaded consequences, the difficulty skyrockets and everything just stalls. And this tells us something so important. Overthinking is not random. It maps almost exactly onto what you value, what you fear losing, and who you love. Your anxiety actually knows exactly what you care about. It just communicates it to you in the absolute worst way imaginable. And honestly, this explains why overthinkers have such a complicated relationship with rest. Stillness removes the one thing keeping those thoughts manageable, which is distraction. You want to relax, but the very moment you sit down on the couch or try to go to sleep or stop scrolling on your phone, the entire mental backlog just floods your brain. That is exactly why you stay constantly busy. Being busy is pretty much the only volume dial you found that actually kind of works to drown out the noise. Now, just understanding all of this doesn't automatically make the overthinking stop, but awareness does allow you to pause and start asking better questions. Instead of desperately asking, how do I make this go away? Try asking yourself, what is this thought actually trying to protect me from? Does that original threat even still exist today? Is my brain reacting to a genuine danger right now, or is this just a very well-practiced habit from my past? More often than not, you'll find that the danger your brain is frantically scanning for dissolved years ago. And that brings us to the ultimate takeaway of this explainer. The goal isn't a quieter mind. It's a more honest relationship with your thoughts. Chasing a perfectly silent mind is really just going to add another layer of frustration and more of that neurological debt we talked about. The real goal is to be able to look at your next mental spiral, acknowledge it, and say, okay, I see what you're doing, I know exactly why you're doing it, but I'm going to consciously decide exactly how much of my evening you actually get to steal. So I'll leave you with this question. The next time your brain starts drafting that 25-minute text message, will you let the white bear take over? Or will you recognize the empathy behind it and finally give yourself permission to just hit send?